I truly believe today would be the happiest day of my life. The doctor smiled. Both mother and baby are healthy. I finally exhaled. Then the nurse placed my daughter in my arms, and everything stopped. She didn't look like me, not even a little. And my wife couldn't meet my eyes. I'm Mark Harris, 38 years old, a civil engineer born and raised in Denver, Colorado. Most days, my life is predictable. Early mornings with strong black coffee, the steady hum of traffic outside my apartment window, and the smell of concrete dust clinging to my work boots. I've always been the kind of man who takes pride in building things that last. Bridges, roads, foundations you can trust. I thought I had done the same with my marriage. Friends would describe me as straightforward, maybe a little stubborn, but loyal to a fault. I believed in doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. That's how I was raised, and it's how I've lived my life. Looking back now, I wonder if that same loyalty blinded me to the cracks forming right under my feet. Cracks that, once exposed, would split everything wide open. I first met Emily on a crisp Saturday morning at the old community center on the east side of Denver. The place had seen better days: peeling paint, warped floors, the faint smell of dust and mildew in the air. I was there with a couple of friends, rolling fresh white paint onto the dingy walls, when the door creaked open. She walked in carrying a box of cleaning supplies almost as big as she was. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and the sleeves of her sweatshirt were speckled with old paint stains. She gave the room a quick scan, then smiled. One of those warm, easy smiles that makes you feel like you've met before. We struck up a conversation about the right paint finish for high-traffic walls. It sounds trivial now, but that moment felt natural, effortless, like we'd skipped the awkward introductions and gone straight to familiarity. I didn't know it then, but that small exchange would change the course of my life. From that very first conversation, something just clicked. There was no need to search for topics or force small talk. The words came easily, like we were picking up where we'd left off in another life. We talked about the most ordinary things: paint rollers, stubborn stains on the floor, but I found myself actually enjoying every second. When she laughed, it wasn't polite or rehearsed. It was unguarded, the kind that makes you want to hear it again. I caught myself watching the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, how she leaned in slightly when I spoke, as if what I was saying actually mattered. Around us, people kept working, the scrape of sandpaper, the splash of paint into trays. But for a few minutes, it felt like the room had gone quiet. By the end of that day, I knew one thing for certain: I wanted to see her again, and not just at a volunteer event. A few weeks later, I finally worked up the nerve to ask Emily out. She said yes without hesitation, and we agreed on a small Italian place tucked between a bookstore and a florist downtown. The kind of restaurant where the lighting is low, the tables are close, and you can smell fresh basil the moment you walk in. Over bowls of pasta and glasses of red wine, we traded stories about our childhoods. She told me about growing up in a small Colorado town, helping her mom in the garden, and dreaming of traveling to Italy someday. I shared how I'd spent my summers building tree houses with my brothers and sketching bridges I swore I'd build when I was older. Somewhere between the breadsticks and dessert, it stopped feeling like a first date and started feeling like the beginning of something real. By the time we stepped out into the cool night air, I realized I didn't want the evening, or the connection, to end. By the time we'd been together a year, Emily and I had seen each other at our best and at our worst. I knew she had a habit of overcommitting to volunteer projects, sometimes running herself ragged trying to help everyone at once. She knew I could be stubborn to the point of frustration, especially when I thought I was right. We'd navigated small arguments, where to spend the holidays, how to load the dishwasher, and celebrated bigger moments, like her promotion at the marketing firm and my team completing a challenging bridge project ahead of schedule. What struck me most was how we handled those ups and downs. We didn't let the small stuff fester, and we supported each other through the big stuff. I admired her drive, her compassion, and the way she lit up when she talked about making a difference in the community. She told me she valued my honesty, my work ethic, and the sense of stability I brought to her life. At that point, I thought we truly knew each other, the good, the bad, and everything in between. When I decided to propose, I didn't plan anything flashy. That wasn't us. I wanted it to feel genuine, not staged for a camera or an audience. One Saturday evening, after we'd cooked dinner together and were sitting on the back porch of her apartment, I pulled out a small velvet box I'd kept hidden in my jacket. The sun was setting over the Denver skyline, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink. My hands were steady, but my voice caught a little as I told her how much she'd changed my life, how I couldn't imagine a future without her in it. When I opened the box, the ring wasn't extravagant, just a simple gold band with a single diamond, chosen because it reminded me of her. Understated, but beautiful. Her eyes filled with tears, and she said, "Yes," before I even finished asking the question. We didn't pop champagne or call everyone right away. We just sat there, hand in hand, letting the moment sink in, knowing we were about to start the rest of our lives together. We got married on a warm spring afternoon in the backyard of Emily's parents' house, just outside Denver. Their garden was in full bloom, tulips and lilacs spilling color across the lawn, the air sweet with the smell of fresh grass. A simple white arch, wrapped in ivy and wildflowers, stood at the center. We'd invited only close friends and family. No big production, no ballroom, just the people who mattered most. I remember standing there in my suit, watching Emily walk toward me in a lace dress that caught the sunlight, her smile wide and unguarded. The ceremony was short but heartfelt. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promises about patience, trust, and building a life together. When we kissed, the sound of applause and laughter filled the garden. We spent the rest of the evening under strings of warm lights, eating barbecue, drinking local craft beer, and dancing barefoot on the grass. It was exactly the kind of start I'd always imagined for our marriage, simple, genuine, and full of hope. A few months after the wedding, we found a small two-bedroom house in a quiet Denver neighborhood, just a short walk from a park with tall cottonwood trees and a winding creek. It wasn't perfect. The kitchen was outdated, the carpet had seen better days. But the moment we stepped inside, it felt like it could be ours. We spent weekends painting the walls, sanding old cabinets, and arguing playfully over which couch to buy. Emily insisted on a bright yellow front door to make it feel welcoming, and I built a set of shelves in the living room from reclaimed wood I'd saved from a job site. Little by little, the place stopped feeling like just a house and started feeling like home. Every nail we hammered, every picture we hung seemed to weave our lives more tightly together. On quiet evenings, we'd sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the Rockies, and talk about the future we were building, one project, one dream at a time. Life settled into a rhythm that felt steady and comforting. Every morning I brewed a pot of strong coffee while Emily made toast or scrambled eggs. We'd sit at the small kitchen table, sunlight spilling through the curtains, talking about our plans for the day before heading off to work. Friday nights became our sacred movie nights. We'd order pizza from the same little place down the street, curl up on the couch under a blanket, and watch whatever we could agree on, usually something light enough to end the week with a laugh. Sundays were for family. Some weeks, we'd drive out to her parents' place for lunch. Other times, my folks would make the trip down from Fort Collins. Those afternoons were filled with food, conversation, and the easy comfort of being surrounded by people who cared about us. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. We were building something, not just a marriage, but a life, and I believed it was strong enough to last forever. About 2 years into our marriage, the idea of having a child stopped being just a someday conversation and started to feel real. We were both in stable jobs, the house was comfortable, and our lives had found a rhythm. One evening, over dinner, Emily brought it up again. Only this time, she wasn't speaking hypothetically. She said she was ready. I'd always wanted to be a dad, but I also knew it wasn't something to take lightly. We spent weeks talking it through, mapping out what it would mean for our finances, our schedules, our future plans. We discussed everything from daycare options to college savings, from which room would become the nursery to whether we'd need a bigger car. We crunched the numbers, figured out what we could cut back on, and started setting aside a portion of every paycheck. It felt responsible, deliberate, the way big decisions in our marriage usually did. When we finally agreed the time was right, I felt a rush of excitement. This was the next chapter, and I was ready to dive in. A few months after we decided to start trying, I came home from work to find Emily waiting for me in the kitchen. She had this wide, almost nervous smile on her face, and behind her back, she was hiding something. "Close your eyes," she said. I laughed, but did as she asked. When I opened them, she was holding a small white gift box tied with a yellow ribbon. Inside was a pair of tiny baby shoes, soft, knitted, barely big enough to fit in the palm of my hand. For a second, I just stared, my brain catching up to what my eyes were seeing. Then it hit me. "You're pregnant?" I asked, my voice half a whisper, half a shout. She nodded, tears welling up. I wrapped her in my arms, feeling this wave of joy and disbelief all at once. That night, we sat on the couch with the baby shoes between us, talking about names, imagining what our life would look like a year from now. It felt like everything we'd been building had just taken on a whole new meaning. Almost as soon as the news sank in, we turned the small spare bedroom into what would become the baby's room. Emily wanted a soft, neutral yellow on the walls, something warm and sunny without being overwhelming. We spent an entire Saturday moving out the old furniture, covering the floor with plastic sheets, and taping the edges. I rolled the paint while she worked carefully along the trim, both of us chatting about where the crib would go, what kind of curtains we'd hang, and whether we should get a rocking chair. The room slowly transformed from a forgotten storage space into a place filled with light and anticipation. We ordered a white wooden crib and a matching dresser, then added little touches, framed prints of animals, a mobile with clouds and stars, and a soft rug in the shape of a moon. Every detail felt like a step closer to meeting our child. At night, we'd stand in the doorway just looking at it. That yellow room became more than a nursery. It was a promise of the life we thought was waiting for us. Once the nursery was nearly done, Emily signed us up for a prenatal class at the community hospital. Every Wednesday evening, we'd join a small group of expectant parents in a bright room filled with exercise balls, bassinets, and diagrams of the human body that suddenly felt way too real. We learned how to swaddle a baby using practice dolls, how to breathe through contractions, and what to expect during labor. I took notes like I was back in college, determined not to be the clueless dad fumbling in the delivery room. At home, we stacked our coffee table with parenting books, everything from the happiest baby on the block to guides on sleep training and baby nutrition. We'd sit side by side on the couch, flipping pages and sharing whatever tips caught our attention. It was work, sure, but it was exciting work. Every fact we learned, every diagram we studied, felt like another brick in the foundation of the life we were building. I thought we were preparing for parenthood together, step for step, heart to heart. The months that followed were filled with small, perfect moments. Saturday mornings when Emily would call me into the bedroom just to feel the baby kick beneath her hand. Late nights when we'd lie in bed, my palm resting on her growing belly, talking to the little life we couldn't wait to meet. We took long evening walks through the park, Emily moving slower as the weeks passed, pausing to catch her breath while I teased her about training for the big day. She'd laugh and swat my arm, but I could see the happiness in her eyes. Every ultrasound appointment was like opening a gift. I'd hold her hand in the dimly lit room as the technician moved the probe across her stomach, and then, there it was, the sound of that tiny, rapid heartbeat. It always made my throat tighten. We took photos of the bump every month, Emily posing in the nursery so we could remember how it all began. At the time, I thought those pictures marked the happiest season of our lives. I didn't know they'd later feel like snapshots from another world. About a month before Emily's due date, our friends and family threw us a baby shower at her parents' house. Their backyard was strung with pastel-colored bunting, and the tables were covered with little centerpieces made of baby bottles filled with candy. There was a cake shaped like a yellow duck, piles of wrapped gifts, and the sound of laughter spilling into the warm afternoon air. Emily moved from guest to guest, one hand resting on her belly, her face glowing as she unwrapped tiny onesies, blankets, and toys. People snapped photos of us holding up baby clothes, pretending to guess how long before they'd be covered in spit-up. Her mom beamed with pride, my parents hugged us tight, and for a few hours, the world felt perfectly safe. I stood there, surrounded by people who loved us, thinking about how lucky this child would be to grow up with so much support. Looking back now, that day feels like a snapshot of a future I thought was guaranteed, a future I didn't realize was already beginning to crack. That night, after the last guest had left and the yard was quiet again, I stood in the nursery surrounded by stacks of baby clothes, unopened boxes of diapers, and a rocking chair we'd barely had time to sit in. Emily was in the living room, talking softly to her mom on the phone, her laughter carrying down the hallway. I remember just standing there, taking it all in. The yellow walls, the smell of fresh paint mixed with baby powder from one of the gifts, the weight of the moment pressing on me in the best way possible. I thought about everything it had taken to get here, meeting Emily, building our home, deciding to start a family, and I felt this deep, overwhelming gratitude. Not everyone gets to have this, I told myself. Not everyone gets to feel this ready, this loved, this sure about the future. In that moment, I honestly believed I was the luckiest man alive. In the weeks after the shower, Emily seemed more affectionate than ever. She'd reach for my hand when we walked through the park, rest her head on my shoulder during movie nights, and leave little notes in my lunch bag. Simple things like, "Can't wait to see you tonight," or "You're going to be an amazing dad." She started packing my coffee thermos in the mornings, slipping in an extra snack just in case. I had a long day. Sometimes I'd come home to find dinner already on the table, candles lit, music playing softly in the background. It felt like we were savoring every moment before the chaos of parenthood began. I told myself this was the calm before the storm, the kind of peace couples talk about years later when they're reminiscing about the good old days. I didn't realize then that sometimes extra affection isn't just love. Sometimes it's a way to quiet a guilty conscience. As winter melted into spring, our life moved forward in a steady, almost cinematic way. Mornings were filled with the smell of coffee and the sound of Emily humming in the kitchen. Evenings were slow and quiet, with the two of us curled up on the couch, her belly a constant, gentle reminder of the future we were about to meet. Weekends were spent doing ordinary things, grocery shopping, tidying the house, folding tiny onesies fresh from the dryer. We made lists of baby names and argued over which stroller was worth the money. Every plan, every errand felt like another thread woven into the fabric of our life together. There was no drama, no tension, nothing to hint at the storm that was already gathering beyond my sight. I went to bed each night believing I had everything I could ever want. Looking back, that peacefulness feels almost cruel, like the quiet lull before a building gives way under its own hidden cracks. If there were warning signs, I didn't see them. Emily laughed easily, asked about my day, and still kissed me goodnight. We talked about the baby constantly, how we'd split up night feedings, which pediatrician to choose, whether we should set up a college savings account right away. She seemed every bit the excited, expectant mother. No secretive phone calls that I noticed, no sudden changes in her routine that set off alarms. If she came home tired, I chalked it up to the pregnancy. If she was quiet some evenings, I assumed she was just lost in thought about the baby. I'd always trusted her completely, so it never occurred to me to look deeper. Why would it? Our life felt solid, stable, unshakable. I didn't know then that trust can be the easiest thing to exploit, because when you believe someone with your whole heart, you stop questioning the shadows at the edges of your vision. It started subtly. A text here and there saying she'd be home a little later than usual because she had to finish up a project. At first, I didn't think much of it. Emily had always been committed to her job, and with her maternity leave coming up, I figured she was just tying up loose ends. But as the weeks went on, the late nights became more frequent. Sometimes she'd get home after I'd already eaten dinner, the smell of takeout clinging faintly to her clothes. She'd brush it off, saying she'd grabbed a bite with a coworker while wrapping up a campaign. I wanted to believe her. I told myself this was just a busy season at work, nothing more. Still, a small, quiet part of me began to notice how she avoided eye contact when she explained, or how her smile seemed rehearsed in those moments. Back then, I didn't realize it was the beginning of a pattern, one that would unravel everything. One evening, while tidying up the kitchen, I noticed a folded receipt left on the counter. It was from a restaurant I'd never been to, an upscale bistro downtown, the kind of place we'd usually save for anniversaries. The bill was for 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, and dessert. The date printed at the top was the night before, a night she'd told me she was working late at the office. When she came into the kitchen, I held it up casually and asked, "Did you go out to dinner?" She didn't miss a beat. Said it was to celebrate a small work victory with a coworker, nothing special. I tried to accept the explanation, but something about it didn't sit right. Emily wasn't the type to splurge without telling me, and we'd been keeping a close eye on expenses with the baby on the way. I slid the receipt back onto the counter, told myself not to overthink it, and yet, that night, I found myself replaying her answer over and over in my head. Not long after the dinner receipt, I started noticing other things. A new designer handbag appeared in our closet, one I knew cost more than we'd usually spend on a single purchase. Then came a pair of high-end shoes, still in their box, tucked behind the laundry hamper. We were supposed to be saving every extra dollar for the baby, the hospital bills, the nursery, the endless stream of diapers and formula that everyone warned us about. Emily had been just as focused on budgeting as I was, or so I thought. When I asked about the handbag, she brushed it off, saying she'd found it on sale and couldn't pass it up. The shoes, she claimed, were a gift from a friend. Maybe it was true. Maybe I was just being overly cautious with money, but the explanations felt thin. Each new item chipped away at the picture I had of our shared priorities. It wasn't about the price tags. It was about the secrecy and the quiet shift I couldn't quite name. Around the same time, I started to feel a shift in the way Emily treated me. Subtle at first, then harder to ignore. She no longer reached for my hand when we walked through the park. Our goodnight kisses became quick and distracted, or skipped altogether. Even on our movie nights, she seemed elsewhere. She'd sit with her phone in hand, scrolling through something she wouldn't share, smiling faintly at the screen instead of at me. When I asked what was so interesting, she'd just say, "Oh, nothing," and set the phone face down. I tried to convince myself it was the pregnancy making her tired or moody. Hormones, stress, the physical strain of carrying a child, it all made sense on paper. But deep down, I felt it, the quiet gap growing between us. And as much as I wanted to bridge it, I didn't know how. Every attempt to get closer seemed to push her just a little further away. One chilly Tuesday evening, I was hanging up Emily's coat after she came home from another late night at the office. As I slipped it onto the hanger, something heavy shifted in the pocket. Curious, I reached in and pulled out a plastic hotel key card. It was branded with the name of an upscale hotel downtown, the kind with valet parking and a lobby that smells like fresh flowers. I turned it over in my hand, my heart already beating faster. At first, I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd been planning a surprise weekend getaway for us, or maybe it belonged to a friend she was helping. But the date printed on the sleeve it came in was from the week before, on another night she'd claimed to be working late. I slipped the card back into her coat before she noticed I'd found it, my mind spinning. I didn't confront her right then. Instead, I tucked the discovery away in the back of my mind. Another piece of a puzzle I wasn't ready to admit I was assembling. A few days after finding the hotel keycard, curiosity got the better of me. One evening, while Emily was in the shower, I sat down at my desk and logged into our joint bank account. My hands felt clammy as I scrolled through the transactions. There they were. Several charges to the same upscale hotel over the past few months. Different dates, different amounts, but all pointing to a place I knew we had never stayed together. The most recent charge lined up exactly with the night I found the key card in her coat. My stomach dropped. I wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, but the pattern was too clear. I sat there staring at the screen, the numbers blurring as a mix of dread and disbelief settled over me. This wasn't just a one-time thing. It was repeated, planned. When Emily came into the room, towel wrapped around her hair, I quickly closed the laptop. She smiled faintly, asking if I was ready for dinner. I forced a smile back, all the while feeling like the floor beneath us had just cracked a little wider. I couldn't hold it in much longer. The next evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, I asked her directly about the hotel charges. I kept my voice calm, almost casual, but inside my chest, my heart was pounding. She didn't flinch. "Sometimes after working late, I'm too exhausted to drive home," she said, rinsing a plate as if the conversation was nothing unusual. "It's easier to just get a room nearby and rest." Her tone was steady, but it didn't match the story. Emily had never been one to spend money lightly, especially on something as indulgent as a downtown hotel room for a night. And if she'd really been too tired to drive, why not call me? I would have picked her up in a heartbeat. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept it, but her explanation felt paper thin, like a patch hastily slapped over a widening crack in the wall. In that moment, I realized I was no longer searching for reassurance. I was collecting evidence. Not long after that conversation, I started noticing more packages arriving at the house. Brown cardboard boxes with her name on them, stacked by the front door when I got home from work. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all order things online. But Emily's behavior around them was different. If I was home when a delivery came, she'd rush to grab it before I could, carrying it straight to the bedroom or the guest room and closing the door behind her. Sometimes she'd slip the boxes into her car trunk before bringing them inside, waiting until later to open them when I wasn't around. When I asked what she was buying, she'd wave me off. "Just work stuff," she'd say. "Client gifts. You wouldn't be interested." I wanted to believe that. I tried, but the secrecy clung to every interaction like a shadow. It wasn't just what was inside the boxes. It was the way she seemed to be sealing off parts of her life from me, one taped-up package at a time. It was subtle at first. Emily started wearing more makeup, even on days when she worked from home. Her hair, which she used to pull back in a simple ponytail, was now freshly styled most mornings. Curls, blowouts, even the occasional salon-level updo. At first, I told myself it was just a pregnancy confidence boost. Maybe she wanted to feel good about herself, and I supported that. I even complimented her, telling her she looked beautiful. But instead of smiling like she used to, she'd glance away, almost like she didn't want me to notice. She began buying new clothes too. Not maternity wear, but fitted dresses and blouses that she only seemed to wear on the days she worked late. I wanted to see these changes as harmless, but paired with the late nights, the hotel charges, and the hidden packages, they painted a picture I didn't want to look at, a picture I couldn't unsee. One evening, as she was touching up her lipstick before heading out for yet another late night at the office, I finally asked, "Why all the extra effort lately? The hair appointments, the new clothes. Is there something you're not telling me?" Her reflection froze in the mirror for just a second before she turned toward me. "Why are you making such a big deal out of nothing?" she snapped, a sharpness in her voice I hadn't heard in a long time. I tried to explain that I was just curious, maybe even concerned, but she rolled her eyes and muttered something about me being paranoid. The conversation ended with her grabbing her purse and walking out, leaving the faint scent of her new perfume hanging in the air. It wasn't a screaming match, but the sting of that exchange lingered. We'd had disagreements before, but never over something as personal as this, and never with that edge of defensiveness. It left me with more questions than answers. One Saturday morning, I got a call from a coworker who lived downtown. He was friendly, chatty, the kind of guy who always had a story to tell. But that day, his tone was different, almost hesitant. He said he'd just walked past a small cafe near Union Station and spotted Emily sitting outside at a table with a man he didn't recognize. They were laughing, leaning in close, talking like they knew each other well. He wasn't trying to stir trouble. In fact, he sounded unsure if he should even mention it. But the detail that stuck with me was this. "I thought it was odd you weren't there," he said. I thanked him, keeping my voice even, but inside, my stomach twisted. Emily had told me she was running errands that morning. Breakfast at home, she'd said. Nothing about going downtown, and certainly nothing about brunch with another man. It was the first time someone else's eyes had confirmed what I'd been too afraid to admit to myself. When Emily got home that afternoon, shopping bags dangling from her arms, I asked her casually, "Did you have breakfast this morning?" She didn't hesitate. "Yeah, just at home, toast and coffee." Her tone was light, almost rehearsed, as she unpacked a new set of throw pillows from one of the bags. I stood there watching her, the image of her at that cafe, laughing with a stranger, playing in my mind like a looping video I couldn't shut off. I didn't call her out, not yet. Instead, I murmured something about being glad she ate and walked away, my chest tight. Her answer should have been harmless, but it wasn't the words. It was the way she said them, smooth, confident, like lying came as naturally as breathing. That moment was when my gut finally caught up with my heart. Something was deeply, dangerously wrong. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of the ceiling fan doing nothing to quiet my thoughts. Piece by piece, the last few months started clicking into place. The late nights, the fancy dinners for two, the new clothes and perfume, the hidden packages, the hotel key card, and now the brunch with a stranger she swore didn't happen. It was like looking at a jigsaw puzzle I'd been working on blindly, suddenly realizing the image it was forming wasn't at all what I'd hoped for. Every memory I replayed seemed different under this new light. I thought about the moments of extra affection, the little notes, the candlelit dinners at home, and how they might not have been signs of love, but guilt. The more I connected the dots, the harder it became to breathe. I wanted desperately to be wrong, to find some missing piece that proved it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew the picture was already complete. A few days later, Emily said she'd be working late again. Same story as always. Big project, tight deadline, probably wouldn't be home until after midnight. I nodded, pretending to accept it, but inside I'd already made up my mind. That evening, I waited 15 minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys and followed. I kept several cars between us, my headlights off when I could, heart pounding like I was doing something illegal. The truth was, it felt wrong to spy on my own wife, but it felt even worse not to know. We didn't head toward her office. Instead, she merged onto the freeway and drove straight downtown. Every mile we traveled made my stomach sink further. I told myself I just needed to see where she was going, that I didn't have to confront her, not yet. But deep down, I knew I was chasing an answer I already feared. I trailed her car through the maze of downtown streets until she turned into the circular drive of the Grand Summit Hotel, a place I knew well by reputation. Polished brass doors, a doorman in a tailored coat, valet attendants moving like clockwork. The kind of place we'd only ever walked past, saying, "Maybe someday." Emily pulled up to the curb, handed her keys to the valet, and stepped out. She wasn't wearing her work clothes. Instead, she had on a fitted navy dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in soft waves, makeup perfect under the glow of the hotel's lights. I parked a block away and watched from the shadows as she disappeared through the revolving doors. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. This wasn't about being too tired to drive home. This was planned, deliberate, and somewhere inside that building I knew was the answer I'd been avoiding for months. I slipped into the hotel a few minutes after she did, keeping my head down and my pace slow. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh flowers and polished wood, the kind of place where every surface gleamed. I positioned myself near a large potted plant, far enough away to stay unnoticed, but with a clear line of sight. That's when I saw her, standing near the lounge entrance, scanning the crowd. A moment later, a man approached. Tall, well-dressed, confident. I'd never seen him before. Emily's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. They exchanged a few words I couldn't hear, then he leaned in slightly, resting his hand on her arm. She laughed, touching his shoulder in return. From where I stood, it was obvious. This wasn't a business meeting, and he wasn't just some acquaintance. The warmth between them was too easy, too familiar. The kind of connection you don't fake. I felt something sharp twist in my chest. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. They moved to a small table in the lounge, the kind tucked into a corner with just enough light to feel private. From my spot behind a marble pillar, I could see them clearly enough. Emily leaned in, her elbows on the table, smiling like she used to smile at me. The man said something and she laughed, not the polite kind, but the unguarded, genuine laugh I'd fallen for years ago. Then his hand slid across the table, resting lightly on her knee. She didn't pull away. Instead, she placed her hand over his, fingers curling in a way that spoke of familiarity, of comfort. That tiny gesture hit harder than any argument or confession ever could. It was the intimacy of it, the ease, the quiet ownership, that made my stomach drop. I stood there frozen, the hotel's warm lighting and soft music pressing in around me, realizing I'd just crossed the line from doubt into certainty. After a while, they stood up, still talking in low voices. The man reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation, fingers interlacing like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched as they walked together across the polished marble floor toward the bank of elevators. Their reflections moved along the gold-trimmed doors, a perfect picture of two people who had no reason to hide, at least from everyone but me. When the elevator arrived, he stepped in first, turning to hold the door as she followed. The panel of buttons glowed softly, and then the doors slid shut with a quiet finality that made my pulse spike. I didn't move. I didn't follow. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, my jaw tight, every sound in the lobby fading except the echo of my own heartbeat. Whatever happened next behind those closed doors, I didn't need to see it to understand what it meant. I stayed there for a few seconds after the elevator doors closed, staring at my own reflection in the polished brass. My legs felt heavy, like they were anchored to the floor, but my chest was hollow. Part of me wanted to storm upstairs, to rip the truth out of the shadows and throw it in her face. But I didn't need to see any more. I already knew. The months of late nights, the hotel charges, the new clothes, the hidden packages, all of it had led here, to this moment. I turned and walked out of the lobby, past the doorman who gave me a polite nod I barely registered. The cool night air hit me like a slap, sharp enough to remind me I was still breathing. I made my way back to my car in a kind of trance, the city lights blurring as I pulled onto the street. I drove home without the radio on, the silence inside the car matching the emptiness I felt. The drive back felt endless, even though the streets were mostly empty. Every red light seemed to hold me there just long enough for another memory of us to surface. Our wedding day, painting the nursery, her laughing at some stupid joke I'd made. Each one landed like a blow. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Porch light on, curtains drawn, a warm glow spilling from the living room window. But stepping inside, it felt different. The air was heavy still, almost like it knew what I'd just seen. I wandered through the rooms in silence, my eyes catching on the little signs of the life we'd built. Her shoes by the door, the sonogram pinned to the fridge, the half-finished baby blanket draped over the couch. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, my mind replaying the image of her hand in his, the way she smiled at him. By the time I went to bed, I knew the life I'd been living had already ended. I just hadn't told her yet. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I didn't make coffee, didn't turn on the news like I usually did. Instead, I pulled my suitcase from the closet and began packing in silence. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, important documents. Every zipper pull and drawer shut echoed in the quiet house. When I was done, I set the suitcase beside my chair in the living room and sat there, waiting. The morning light crept in through the blinds, painting long stripes across the floor. My pulse was steady, but my chest felt tight, like it was bracing for impact. Around 9 a.m., I heard the crunch of tires in the driveway. The front door opened and Emily stepped in, keys in hand, wearing the same navy dress from the night before. She froze when she saw me sitting there, suitcase at my side. I didn't say anything at first. I just let the silence stretch between us until it was heavy enough to bend the air. Emily blinked, the surprise flickering across her face for just a second before she forced a smile. "Hey," she said lightly, as if she'd just come home from a normal day at work. "You're up early." She set her purse on the counter and slipped off her heels, moving around the room like nothing was wrong. But her eyes kept darting to the suitcase beside me, and I could see the question forming behind them. "I thought you were working late last night," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "I was," she replied without missing a beat, avoiding my gaze as she walked toward the kitchen. I didn't move. I didn't look away. "Don't," I said, sharper this time. That stopped her mid-step. The air between us shifted. For the first time in months, she seemed unsure of her footing, like she didn't know which story to tell. And in that hesitation, I knew the truth was about to come out. I stood up slowly, the weight of the suitcase handle in my grip, and faced her. "I followed you last night," I began, my voice measured, almost too calm. "I saw you walk into the Grand Summit Hotel. I saw you meet him in the lobby. I saw you holding his hand, laughing with him, going upstairs together." Her face went pale, but I didn't stop. "Before that, I found the hotel key card in your coat pocket. I checked our bank statements, charges to the same hotel, month after month. The dinner receipts for two, the new clothes, the lies about where you were." Each word felt like a stone dropped between us, closing the distance but making it impossible to cross. By the time I finished, she was gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that leaves no room for misunderstanding. She knew I wasn't guessing. I was telling her exactly how I'd watched our marriage collapse in real time. Emily's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked almost offended. "That's not what you think it is," she said quickly, shaking her head. "You've got it all wrong." I didn't respond, just let the silence press down on her until her voice sharpened. "Are you seriously spying on me now? Following me around? Going through our bank account like some kind of detective?" Her tone rose, her words quick and defensive. She crossed her arms, glaring at me as if I were the one who'd done something wrong. "Do you have any idea how insulting this is? How controlling you sound?" I kept my voice even. "I'm not guessing, Emily. I saw you. I know." That stopped her. but only for a second. Then the anger flared again, burning hotter, as if she thought she could shout down the truth. But all I could hear in that moment wasn't her words. It was the sound of the last thread of trust between us snapping in two. Her voice faltered mid-accusation. The fight seemed to drain from her shoulders, and for the first time, she couldn't hold my gaze. She stared at the floor, her arms loosening at her sides. "It's true," she said quietly, almost a whisper. "I've been seeing someone." The words hung there, heavier than anything she'd yelled minutes before. My ears rang, and for a second I thought I might actually be sick. I'd been bracing for this moment for months, but hearing it spoken out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. She went on about how it just happened, how she didn't mean for it to go this far. I barely registered the details, some mix of late nights, needing someone to talk to, and feeling neglected. Every word sounded like an excuse trying to dress itself as an explanation, and none of it mattered. The truth was finally out, and with it, the last bit of hope I had for us. I don't know what made me ask the question. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was self-preservation. "Is the baby mine?" I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut the air between us. She froze, and that pause told me more than any answer could. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. I don't know." The words landed like a blow to the chest. My mind raced, replaying every moment of the pregnancy, the ultrasounds, the baby kicks, the night spent painting the nursery, all now tainted by doubt. She rushed to add that it wasn't supposed to happen, that she'd ended things with him as soon as she found out she was pregnant. But the timeline didn't add up, and I knew it. There's a kind of silence that follows certain truths, the kind that doesn't just fill a room, but makes it impossible to breathe. That's where we stood, both of us knowing there was no way back from this. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The shock burned away, leaving only a cold, steady clarity. I realized there was nothing left to salvage. No amount of apologies, explanations, or promises could undo the damage. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice flat, almost detached. The words felt heavy, but they came without hesitation. Emily's eyes widened, her mouth opening like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. She finally managed, "Can't we at least try, for the baby?" I shook my head. "That child may not even be mine, and even if she was, you made choices I can't forgive." For months, I had been clinging to the hope that this was all a misunderstanding, that the woman I married was still somewhere in there. But the truth was standing in front of me now, and I didn't recognize her anymore. It wasn't anger driving me. It was survival. I needed to get out before the wreckage consumed me entirely. The weeks that followed were a kind of quiet war. We still lived under the same roof, but the house felt colder, smaller. I moved into the guest room, taking only what I needed. A few clothes, my laptop, a stack of paperwork. The rest stayed where it was, like the life we'd built was frozen in place, waiting for someone to claim it. We spoke only when necessary, and even then, our words were stripped to the bare minimum. Mail's on the counter. Your parents called. Dinner's in the fridge. Every sentence carried the weight of everything we weren't saying. At night, I'd hear her moving around in the other room, the creak of the floorboards, the sound of drawers opening and closing. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at me in the hallway, her eyes red like she'd been crying. But I didn't ask, and she didn't offer. We were strangers now, bound together only by walls and paperwork, counting down the days until the end. When the call came that Emily was in labor, I didn't hesitate. Despite everything, I got in my car and drove to the hospital. Part of me told myself it was the right thing to do, to be there in case, against all odds, the baby was mine. Another part of me knew I couldn't just walk away from a moment this big, no matter what had happened between us. The delivery room was bright and busy, nurses moving quickly, machines beeping in steady rhythms. Emily didn't look at me much, her focus fixed on the nurses and the doctor. I stayed by the wall, out of the way, my hands shoved into my jacket pockets. Hours later, the cry of a newborn filled the room. The nurse turned and handed Emily the baby first, then eventually passed her to me. I looked down at that tiny face, and my heart sank. Even before anyone said a word, I knew. The moment I looked at her, every last shred of doubt disappeared. She was beautiful, tiny, perfect, with a head full of dark curls and skin the color of warm bronze. But she didn't look like me. not even close. I'd told myself for months that maybe genetics could surprise us, that maybe there was some distant relative whose traits might explain it. But standing there in that delivery room, holding her in my arms, I knew the truth without a single test. My chest tightened, a mix of heartbreak and something I couldn't quite name. This little girl had done nothing wrong. She was innocent, a life just beginning. But her very existence confirmed the betrayal I'd been trying to process. Emily avoided my eyes, staring down at the hospital sheets as if they might offer her an escape. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I handed the baby back gently, my hands trembling, and walked to the corner, trying to steady my breath. 2 days later, I went back to the hospital alone to sign the paperwork for a paternity test. The nurse explained the process. A simple swab from the inside of my cheek, another from the baby. It took minutes, but it felt like the longest moment of my life. Emily didn't come with me. She'd already said she wasn't sure who the father was, but seeing it in black and white would make it undeniable. When the results came back, the words were blunt and final. Probability of paternity, 0%. No explanation, no room for debate, just the cold certainty of science. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, the paper trembling in my hands. I'd prepared myself for this, told myself I already knew, but the confirmation still hit like a fresh wound. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of the future I'd been building in my mind for months, a future I now had to let go of completely. In our state, proof of infidelity can speed up the divorce process. With the DNA results and everything else I'd gathered, there wasn't much left to discuss. My lawyer filed the paperwork within days, and Emily was served before the week was over. We had no shared children, no complicated assets to divide. The house went to her. I didn't want it anymore. Every room was a reminder of what we'd built and how quickly it had crumbled. I took my share of the savings and focused on finding a place of my own. When the court date came, it was brief. We sat on opposite sides of the room, barely looking at each other. The judge read through the terms, asked if we both agreed, and with the stroke of a pen, it was over. It's strange how something that took years to build can be dismantled in less than 20 minutes. I walked out of that courthouse lighter in some ways, but with a heaviness in my chest I knew wouldn't lift anytime soon. A few days after the divorce was finalized, Emily showed up at my new apartment unannounced. She stood in the doorway, eyes swollen and red, clutching a crumpled tissue in one hand. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "A horrible mistake. Please, can we try again? For everything we had? For the baby?" I let her talk, let her spill every apology, every promise that it would be different this time. But as I listened, all I could think about were the lies, the secrecy, the nights she chose someone else over the life we'd built. "I can't," I said finally, my voice steady. "There's no trust left. Without that, there's nothing." She cried harder, leaning against the doorframe like she might collapse. I didn't move to comfort her. I'd done that for years. This time, I closed the door gently but firmly, leaving her on the other side. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival. The asset division was straightforward, almost mechanical. My lawyer handled most of it. Bank accounts split down the middle, the car in my name, the house in hers. I didn't fight for furniture or keepsakes. I wanted a clean break, even if it meant walking away from things I'd once cared about. I found a small one-bedroom apartment across town, nothing fancy, just clean walls, good light, and no ghosts of the past in every corner. Moving day was quiet. A couple of friends helped me load boxes into a rented truck. No arguments, no drawn-out goodbyes, just the hum of tape-sealing cardboard and the thud of footsteps on stairs. That first night, I sat on the floor with a takeout pizza and a single lamp, listening to the distant sound of traffic through the open window. The space was bare, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. A few weeks after settling into the apartment, I booked my first session with a therapist. I'd never done therapy before, but I knew I couldn't untangle the mess in my head on my own. The first session was awkward, sitting there, telling a stranger about the worst moments of my life. But she listened without judgment, asking questions that forced me to slow down and actually feel the weight of what had happened. Week by week, we peeled back the layers. The betrayal, the anger, the shame I didn't want to admit to anyone else. She helped me understand that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but learning to live without letting it control me. Some days, I left her office feeling lighter. Other days, I walked out raw and exhausted, like I'd been digging through wounds I'd tried to bury. But even then, I knew it was worth it. Therapy became the first real step toward getting my life back, not the life I had with Emily, but the one I was building for myself. Once the fog in my head started to lift, I threw myself into work. As a civil engineer, there's something grounding about plans and blueprints, problems with solutions, lines that stay where you draw them. It was the opposite of the chaos I'd just lived through. I also began reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen much during my marriage. At first, it felt strange walking into bars or coffee shops alone, scanning for familiar faces. But they welcomed me back without hesitation, like no time had passed at all. We swapped stories, laughed about old memories, and made new plans. For the first time in a long while, my evenings weren't filled with tension or suspicion, just the easy comfort of people who knew me before all of this. Between the steady rhythm of work and the warmth of old friendships, I felt the scaffolding of a new life starting to take shape. As the months passed, I started reaching for pieces of myself I'd left behind. One weekend I dusted off my old hiking boots and drove out to the Rockies. The air was sharp and clean, and every step up the trail felt like shedding another layer of heaviness I'd been carrying. At the summit, I stood there with the wind in my face, realizing I hadn't felt that free in years. I also pulled my easel out of the closet, the one that had sat untouched since before I met Emily. I stocked up on paints and spent quiet evenings filling canvases with color. It wasn't about skill or perfection. It was about letting my mind wander without rules or expectations. These hobbies didn't erase what happened, but they reminded me I was more than the pain. Piece by piece, I was reclaiming the parts of myself I thought I'd lost. A year after the divorce, I felt ready, or at least ready enough, to open the door to someone new. It wasn't about replacing Emily. It was about proving to myself that love didn't have to come with betrayal. Through mutual friends, I met Claire. She was nothing like Emily, not in looks, not in temperament. Claire was steady, genuine, and spoke with a kind of honesty that made me want to listen. We took it slow, coffee dates, long walks through downtown Denver, evenings spent talking about everything from music to the mountains we both loved hiking. From the start, I told her about my past. I expected the usual awkwardness or pity, but she just nodded and said, "Thanks for trusting me with that." No judgment, no need to rush. Being with her didn't erase the scars, but it showed me that those scars didn't have to define me. For the first time in years, I felt safe letting someone in again. Every now and then, word about Emily reached me through mutual acquaintances. The latest was that she was struggling, money tight, emotions frayed, and that the man she'd left our marriage for had vanished from her life entirely. Hearing it stirred a strange mix of feelings. Part of me felt a deep, quiet sadness. We had once shared dreams, made plans, believed we'd grow old together. To know she was facing all of this alone wasn't something I could take joy in, but beneath that sadness was a lighter feeling. Relief. Relief that I was no longer tangled in her choices, no longer carrying the weight of her lies or the fallout of her decisions. Her life was hers to manage now, just as mine was mine. It wasn't about revenge or justice. It was simply the clean separation I'd fought for, and the freedom I'd finally learned to value. Looking back now, I see that betrayal didn't just end my marriage. It ended a chapter of my life I thought would last forever. But that's all it was, a chapter. It didn't get to decide the rest of my story. That pen is still in my hand. I've learned that healing isn't about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about building something stronger on the other side, a life that's truly yours. Emily's choices may have stolen a season from me, but they didn't get to define the ending. If you're going through something like this, I want you to remember, betrayal can take a chapter from your life, but it can't write the rest of the book. You are the author. And if you've lived through something similar, share your story. Someone out there needs to hear how you made it through, so they know they can too.